Welcome everyone. People in Bristol, UK, and in Cape Town, South Africa, and around the world. Welcome to this Bristol Conversations in Education and I'm delighted to introduce here Terra Sprague, who's my colleague in TESF, who's a very active member of SIRE and also the Small States Research Group. I can see Michael Crossley's in the audience somewhere there as well. So she's going to be talking about her doctoral research that she did here in the university, and also Dr. Injairu Kulundu-Bolus, who I met about 10 years ago now, back in January 2020, before all of this. And at that time, I was so struck by her presentation, which was here at the university, which was basically singing the research findings from her doctoral research. So we're so lucky to have these two academics here today to talk especially and particularly about their doctoral research journeys and the unintended methodologies which they developed through the course of their work. I think it's so rare to have academics to be talking honestly and so generously about their work. So I'm delighted that they're going to be sharing their experiences today. So just to give you an overview of the events, the flow for this session, we're going to start with Terra and Injairu talking about their doctoral research. And then we've got some interviews, an interview. I'll be going first with some questions about their work. After which there's an opportunity really for a more participative element of this conversation session, where we'll be reflecting with the audience participants on strategies for listening. And we've got a Padlet to support work on that. And after which there'll be some opportunity for more general Q&A with some final thoughts from Leon, who's obviously the director of our TESF network, which I should have mentioned that Terra and Injairu and myself and others are working in. So I think I've said enough here, but it's my pleasure to hand over to Terra now, please.
Hi, everybody, and we're going to be taking a little trip to St. Lucia. So I'm going to ask Raphael, if you don't share your screen, I'm going to share my screen in a minute. And I think Joe's going to put a link to a YouTube video. I'm going to be reading an excerpt from my thesis. And if you really want to put yourself in this place, you can click on this link and in the background, listen to some waves music if you want to. Keep yourself on mute, obviously, but just adds another kind of element to it. So if you give me a second, I'm going to get things set up here. So we're going to, there we go. Can you see I'm in a mangrove forest now? And I'm going to share my screen with you and show you a picture of the seashore that we're going to be at. Okay. So welcome to the seaside in St. Lucia. And is everybody able to see? Raphael, can you let me know, is the image showing all right?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, cool. Okay, so if you're not familiar with what a mangrove is, what you can see behind me is an amazing kind of forest, and mangroves are really incredible trees that are an ecosystem buffer basically between the ocean and the land, and you find them around the coasts of many islands and other tropical areas, and they do an amazing job of creating a buffer and a filter. They're one of the very few kinds of trees that can survive in really salinated areas. So in my thesis, I have conversations with mangroves. My thesis is about changing environmental concerns in 3 island countries. Today, we're going to be just focusing on St. Lucia. And I write through narrative approaches, and I basically constructed a number of conversations with mangrove forests in these islands. And the Mangrove represents all of the cumulative, basically all of the interview and focus group information, all of the conversations that I had come blending together, being spoken by a mangrove. So I'm going to be having a conversation with mangrove trees from St. Lucia, in which they're going to recall a situation about a severe seaweed influx that created a sense of panic amongst the people. And they share how an experiment with time and trusting nature led to a great surprise on the beach. So I ask a few questions in this conversation, but mostly it's the mangroves speaking, and it's many mangroves, so they're kind of disembodied voices. So St. Lucia mangroves, can you say more about this seaweed the people have been concerned about? Do you remember back when that terrible seaweed caused such a havoc? Those were crazy days. Why? What went wrong with the seaweed? It was the summer of 2014, and this strange seaweed began to pile up in quantities so vast I cannot recall happening before. But we've had seaweed accumulation before, no? Sure, but not like this. Remember how it lined the beach up and down? It covered the sand entirely in a rainbow of yellow, orange, rust, and black, piled up high to our trunks, reaching people's knees. People would move around on the beach, bouncing around like walking on a seaweed sponge. And the sea turtles struggled too, remember? Oh, did they get caught up in it? Worse than caught. They could hardly get onto the beach to lay their eggs, and digging their nests was nearly impossible. When the little turtles hatched, they really struggled to get down to the water. The fish suffered too. There was so much seaweed in the water in some places that there wasn't enough oxygen, and many fish died. How did the people react? Families who came for a swim could hardly relax. There was too much seaweed on the beach and in the water. It ruined family picnics and outings. Everybody was complaining about the smell as well. Oh, it was bad. The seaweed decomposes, and the smell is pretty putrid to people, especially on the coastal towns. But that smell wafted up all along the coast, along from the airport and up towards Castries on the other side of the island. And you know, the taxi drivers, they were telling tales to visitors about what it was in order to cover up the fact. Townspeople were complaining that it was making it hard for them to breathe, and they were worried about their health. One of them said, "This thing produces a terrible sulfuric smell, and it's really uncomfortable. It causes respiratory illnesses. People have been reporting irritation, poor breathing, that kind of problem." So people were beginning to panic about it. Yes, especially the fishermen. It was very serious for them. Some of them were stuck in the bays for days because there was too much seaweed to move through the water to get out for fishing. When they got out, seaweed was stuck in their nets, boats, everything needed repairing. Did it impact the tourism in St. Lucia? Kite surfers and seaweed tangled in their boards, and the sports operators were losing business. One of them said, "If it's going to be like this every tourist season, I don't know where the tourists are going to go, but that side of our business, I don't know what's going to happen." I imagine the hotel owners are worried about it too. Yes, tourists were complaining about their expensive beach holidays being ruined. They were very upset. The government was really worried about that. They were concerned that if people complained that St. Lucia's beaches are not clean, but covered in seaweed, that the reputation would spread and the tourists would stop coming. Hotels promised their customers sandy beaches, and the hotelier saw the seaweed as unsightly, and someone observed that it's not something that they want to see every day on their beaches in front of their properties, so they have to do something about it. People were afraid that this seaweed invasion was going to damage their health and economy. With no end in sight, nobody could say when it would stop. Was it all bad news? Was there any positive side at all? Well, some people did try to make something good of it. Initially, the fishermen were happy at the rise in their daily catches because some of the mahi-mahi nurseries seemed to travel with the seaweed mass, and the fish catches were really good at first. Other people began using seaweed as fertilizer, but there's just too much of it and it kept returning. What can they do if there's so much of it and it keeps coming every day? First, people began to remove the seaweed straight away. They came in teams, removed it by hand, but it was painstaking work. So then they started bringing in tractors onto the beach and took the seaweed out that way with heavy machinery. But that puts grooves in the sand, and we know it's damaging to the beach. Somebody pointed this out, saying, heavy machinery is used on the beaches to actually clear it. Now, this is very damaging activity and it's highly unsustainable. The fact of the matter is that using heavy machinery on the beach will cause lots of erosion, sand compacting, and so forth. Even when they brought the tractors down on the beach, it was too much to handle. And one afternoon, we watched a group clean the beach from one end to the other. And you know what they said when they were done? They said, when we get tractors down to go down here, we work for the entire day, and we cannot see where we started. So we can't make much of a dent. So everyone was pretty worried. Huh? I tell you, there was a seashore man in our area of the coast. He didn't get fussed about it. We know him very well. He and his friends worked on the coast for a long time. They would come down every day, working hard to maintain the habitat and bring visitors to find out more. This one, he tried something different. He knew that nature could offer a different course if given time. He watched and took special interest in our area of the beach. We watched him doing this for a few months. What was his approach? He didn't clean up the seaweed. He left it all right there for weeks and didn't let a soul touch it either. He's very patient. His mother used to tell him stories about how people are too obsessed with cleanliness and were always trying to make nature tidy. This reminded me of the way the tourists and hotel owners couldn't stand the seaweed and is saying that it was horrible and ugly. His mother told him that this works against nature, and he noticed that people in their obsession with it can't.
Terra, your mic just went off.
Okay, is that back?
Yes.
Okay. So what happened? The seaweed built up, a lot of it, and then started to integrate into the sand, and the beach began to change. It was being restored, building back up to where it had been eroded for years previously. He said, from the time the seaweed came, no interference with it. The beach has come back at least 12 to 15 feet. That's remarkable, but why? What does seaweed have to do with the health of the beach? He told people that leaving the seaweed alone acts as a filter and retains the sand that comes onto the shore with the waves. That sand builds up over time, widening the beach, and when the seaweed finally decomposes, the sea washes it back out. He started to bring people down to the beach to show them what happened, and he left the seaweed alone. His message was to trust nature and her processes and to be in less of a hurry. He encouraged people to let nature heal itself because time and tolerance is what was needed to transform the beaches back to a healthy state. You know, he told these people, we like to see some things fixed too fast, but we don't understand that everything has life. The sea has life, the land, the plants, and everything. So if we trouble the sea while it's doing its work, we are in for destruction. So if we let the sea do its work, we are being protected. Let nature take its course, I always tell people, because the sea is alive and the sea will build resilience for it not to destroy the mainland. Then after this conversation, I just go on and I do a kind of analysis to explore 3 enablers to trusting nature that come out from this episode. And that includes things like having understanding that nature is proximity informed, having stories upon which to draw, and then possessing a multiplicity perspective through things like income diversification, which is really what helped a lot of St. Lucians to make it through this particular time period. So this was in 2014. So I'm going to stop sharing that now. And thank you very much for listening to this episode. And I think back to you, Raphael.
Yeah, thank you, Terra. So thank you so much. We'll be hearing more from Terra shortly, but let's move on directly now to Dr. Injairu Kulundu-Bolus. So please let's hear your performance.
Hi, everybody. My name is Injairu, as Raphael has said. Thank you so much, Terra, for sharing that story. It's such a powerful one. I'm going to be moving us into just a quick look into the South African context and some of the work that I've been doing. And very briefly, my work has really been about trying to tune into and finding ways of coherently singing out to the rising cultures that are showing up amongst change drivers in South Africa. So I'll start by a very short excerpt of a poem by Misere Mugo, who contextualizes why song. And the poem is called Where Are Those Songs? Where are those songs that my mother and yours always sang, fitting rhythms to the whole vast span of life? What was it again that they sang? Harvesting millet, threshing maize, storing the grain. What did they sing? Bathing us, rocking us to sleep. And the one that they sang, stirring the pot, swallowed in part by choking smoke. What did they sing at the ceremonies? Childbirth. What was the warrior song? How did the wedding song go? Sing me the funeral song. Sing. I have forgotten my mother's song. My children will never know. But this I remember. Mother always said, sing, child, sing. Make a song and sing. Beat out your own rhythms to your own life. But make the song soulful and make life sing. Sing, daughter, sing. Around you are unaccountable tunes. Some sung, others unsung. Sing them to your rhythms. Observe, listen, absorb, soak yourself. Bathe in the stream of life, and then sing. Sing simple songs for the people, for all to hear and learn and sing. And to invite some of the change drivers that I've had engaged in conversation into this conversation, I'm going to play a brief video of an excerpt of some of what Sanele in particular was sharing at the time, and I'll come back and speak to it afterwards. Can you see that?
Yep.
Cool. Exactly to where we can all dip in together quite quickly. Just a tiny bit of context. This was recorded in 2018, so it's a conversation we were having at that time.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the different other issues that you have been concentrating on in your work. What are the really critical issues that you feel are really important to focus on right now as a change driver? What are the critical issues that you feel we need to be paying attention to?
I think in South Africa, there's a conversation as young people we need to be having honest conversation about class, about about some of the blackmails we are doing to each other, right? And we're hiding so many things based on, our individual's oppression. And there's issues we are not ready to confront as young people. We're not ready to have a conversation about class, about gender. We're not ready to have that conversation. And an honest conversation about our connection with the continent. So I think those three key things stand out for me. I'll start with the one on class. Having been at a university where you have, there's a lot of black middle class, and whatever that means, people with so much, you see people who speak in a certain way, people who own certain things you don't own, and for me, my going to Rhodes University and having been in a school in a township school, there was so much opulence I saw in the space. People owning so many gadgets and driving cars and stuff like that. You just see that this is really good. It's a good life. You aspire to get there, right? But within that space, then you feel like you don't quite belong, right? You don't quite belong. Even if you meet a person who speaks your language, you kind of have conversations, but you don't have conversations. No one is really, no one is listening and paying attention, to you and your story. A person is interested in fact, one thing I was asked when I went out in one of the social nights, a person asked me, so what's your name? I told them my name, and I asked what their name was. And then the following question was, where did you go to school? When I immediately said, I went to Injairu, that was the end of the conversation. That's when the conversation ended and the night went on. And I realized those micro divisions amongst black people, even in terms of the dining hall setup, how we arrange ourselves, who people group themselves with, who do you go out with, and so on. And I realized that there was so many, we are not unified as black people. Not that there was anything that really wanted unity at that point, but I saw that I kind of felt like I did not belong in the space, not accepted, and I accepted that, and I took that as a norm. And then later on, fast forward, you grow up, you learn about things, you learn about histories, and people start to challenge the status quo of whiteness, of colonialism, and so forth. And particularly last year, with the wake of The Rhodes Must Fall, then people started to come together, black people in particular, started to come together in a space to have serious conversations about what it means to be studying at Rhodes University, to be studying in a university that is imbued by whiteness, by white symbolism, by what we learn in the classroom, that is basically affirming white experiences and talking about the white world to us, what those kind of things mean to us. And we're having this conversation as a collective of black people coming from these different places. But in that conversation, there was a lot of denialism, on where we are, on some of the things we have not come to agree on as black people. Like we have this conversation, Bulisanga, you don't even know my name, you have not even greeted me. We get into the space and we pretend as if things are normal, whereas you don't even greet me there. You after the conversation, you go and have, a nice sushi with your friends, So it was just like very strange for me, because I felt the conversations were not honest enough, because the people who would then have the conversations would be the very same people who were not greeting you 2 years ago, with the very same people who were like judging you for saying you're coming from Injairu, and not understand where you're coming from. then the problem then with that is that the space was owned by these very same people who were problematic to the ones who were marginalized, because these people, we had these conversations. It's not like we did not see that there was just micro class divisions amongst ourselves. We had the conversations. We were like, "Haibo, but you know, oban noban bahlala kohlobo. This is how they are doing things," and then now all of a sudden they are the most oppressed, they are the most marginalized, they are the most silenced people. Whereas they were friends with Eric, no, not Donovan. They were friends, okokoko, and you never had time for Jonathan and Eric, because you never belonged when you just and you were carried on. They were friends, they were buddies. All of a sudden now they are calling Eric a problematic and whatever. Eric has always been problematic to me. Eric has always been like, I did not care about Eric that much. And the conversation starts to be about now, let's interrogate whiteness and how whiteness is a problem. But then now, like, then in that conversation, we're ignoring that even this blackness we're talking about, it's very different, it's nuanced, it's not one strand of blackness.
I'm going to leave it there, just as a way of holding it. You can see there's so much, but I'm just gonna hold that there, and then just share this. So I want to play back to you what I heard from what Sanella was saying. And I'm putting the words up so we can read together, so you can hear what it is that I heard him say through that. Let's play out our blackness and meet as the strangers we are. We build our case from the fragments that center the losses we prefer. Sia Kwinezelana, oh. Sia Jigelana, oh. Oh, together. No basia sokola sonke. Sia Kwinezelana, oh. Let's explore these fragments and face what we have become. I hear a voice that names the damage in a way that excludes those around. Sia Twinezelana, oh. Sia Jigelana, oh. Oh, together, no basa sokola, Sia Twinezelana. How can this be about you when you don't have a clue? Can you share the world and reveal history's truths beyond what pertains to you? And when did we learn to defend our own versions of hell without acknowledging what people go through beyond what pertains to you? Sia Twinezelana, Sia Jigelana, oh, oh, no basia sokola sonke, Sia Twinezelana. So that was my way of surfacing the discourse that Sanele brought up in that little snippet of his offering. And we can talk a bit, I want to hand it back to Raphael so we can talk a bit about what all this means and how we got to there. But there's many more to share, but I just shared that small bit and see, I hope it reads from where you're at, yeah.
Yes, thank you, Injairu and Terra. Yes, thank you for deeply moving, in fact, presentations there. That's my reaction to it anyway. That's what I'm feeling now. So I thought I'd take this opportunity to ask you some questions, and the audience will have a chance later on. But let me start by with a question for Terra, since you started us here today. Together you've termed this contribution to Bristol Conversations in Education unintended methodology. Yeah. So can you explain why and how these methodologies that you've developed through the course of your doctoral research are unintended? What is unintentional about what you've done here?
Yeah, I think that's a funny title for this that Injairu and I came across. We knew we'd been invited to put together a seminar about our different approaches that are arts informed. But as we were talking, we realized that neither one of us had expected to use any of these methodologies. They were not what we had planned to use when we started out on the doctoral path. So for me, I knew that the study would have something to do with environmental change in islands, and I was really curious about the concept of resilience. And what I wanted to do at first was to develop a kind of typology. So within island studies, we tend to work kind of in regions. And there's a lot of islands in the Pacific region, a lot in the Caribbean and the Indian Ocean, and we tend to come across lots of studies that are comparative regional studies. So that's kind of where my mind went first, and I thought I would develop a kind of typology. Those little shadow boxes that you have on your wall sometimes that you put trinkets in, and I kind of felt like maybe somehow I would manage to articulate different ways of understanding what resilience meant in the face of environmental change in different places. And then I realized that you can't stuff seaweed into a shadow box because it oozes all over the place. So yeah, it was really not what I had intended to use a narrative analysis approach or ever to write a story or to try to think about using the metaphorical constructs of a mangrove forest. So none of that was what I had anticipated. And so the process was a lot of letting go of what I thought it would be and allowing that unintended, the unexpected to make its own way into the process.
Thanks, Terra. I've got a follow-up question relating to that. So I'm wondering, at what point in your doctoral journey did you make these realizations? Let me ask you that.
After I'd done most of my field work, which for a while felt like quite a tragedy. I really didn't know, the idea of a cognitive dissonance where you realize something, you can't unrealize it. It was actually something that I kind of felt all the way along doing my field work, but I didn't know how to resolve it. And so I was on one of my fieldwork visits to Fiji, I gave a seminar for a group of academics at the University of the South Pacific, and they very lovingly kind of asked me some very challenging questions, which were the ones I was asking myself. And I thought, yeah, I can't ignore these anymore. And it was about this idea of, how can you be, sensitive to context and still try to put things into this little tidy idea of compare and contrast, and will that really kind of squash out the particularities, and won't you lose a lot of the beauty of what what participants have shared. And so I came back from my field work and I spent probably a process of about 6 months searching for a completely different theoretical framework and trying to find a methodology that basically kept evolving up until the very, very end of the last page of the thesis, really. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Terra. I think I think this is extremely helpful for people in the room as well, especially those who are currently going through their doctoral research journeys, to hear these kind of very honest reflections on this messy process which you've described there. Let's turn to Injairu. Let's ask the same question to you then about the unintended aspects of what you've done.
Yeah, similarly to Terra, straight after the fieldwork is where everything got messy. And I think maybe you could see in the brief video that I shared, just the generative, rich space that we created together that were very immersive and arts-based, as a way of really gauging what change drivers across South Africa were feeling and how they were choosing to transgress. And each person offered such a beautiful nugget of their experience through a filmed offering like the one that you saw by Sanele. And I sat with all the richness of this knowledge. And of course, the next question is, what do you do? What am I supposed to do with this next? And how could I do something with it that honored the spirit with which we had gathered? And luckily for me at that time, I was trying to write a paper that was the first time that I was trying to almost metabolize the data, so to speak. And it was such a critical point for me because in trying to write out a little bit of this complexity, I inevitably started losing it. And even more so, what really freaked me out more than that is when I was trying to share it back to these amazing people who had shared so much of themselves, I felt a sense of alienation creeping in. And like we had traveled shoulder to shoulder and quite intimately. And I was so aware that the methodology that could lead into the way the thesis lived out there in the world could somehow separate from that intimacy we had created. And so I had to struggle to think about how else can I do this that in a way that can still communicate the academic rigor needed, the nuance, but perhaps move away from the linear forms that kind of writing sometimes puts you into. What kind of ways of expressing can I speak about all of the things, the emotion, in a way that's coherent, in a way that honors what somebody has offered? And eventually I was like, maybe I should just try and work this into a poem of some sort. Oh, maybe it's a song. Maybe each person has a song line. So yeah, that's what happened. Completely unintended, just down the road, yeah, out of a crisis.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. So interestingly, it seems like in both cases then, it's something to do with the kind of the sense-making process. Once you've collected your data, where you're in the process of kind of representing that you feel some kind of, it seems in both cases, some kind of struggle for authenticity, while like kind of maintaining what you're describing as like the rigors of academic expectations or accountability to the academic community, to accountability to something else with the participants and the stories that you've shared together. Can you give some more examples? And Injairu, let's start with you again. Like I'd like to hear just some of the what are some of the critical. Could you just boil down to some of the critical events that that led to this changing in your thinking?
I think the penny dropping or my heart sinking to the bottom of my feet was when I had shared what I'd really thought was a carefully written kind of paper reflecting on what we had done. And I was only working with 4 of the offerings that I'd received. And I shared it back to the co-conspirers I was working with, and crickets. Like I wanted a way of talking about, of acknowledging what I heard that wouldn't alienate. And I was so aware that the way that we're engaging it stopped. And so I was really frustrated and scared. So I had to find a different way of communicating that, as I said before, really honor the spirit of how things had come. And luckily, actually, also the big tipping point was when I showed the scribbles that I had written down to a critical friend. She's the one who helped me see that, well, I don't know what this is, because my question to her was, what is this? Because I didn't know what I'd written. And she said to me, I don't know what it is, but it screams when it needs to scream, it moans when it needs to moan, it's honest about the experience. And that was very useful for me. It made me feel like, okay, maybe this is what I'm picking up is songlines, the music behind that, the unaccountable tune that sits behind each person's offering. Yeah.
Thanks, Injairu. Let me ask you the same question, Terra. You've already referred to a kind of where you were presenting some of your ideas to at a seminar where people were echoing some of the self-doubts that you had. Could you just elaborate a bit on that, please?
Yeah, I think it was, I had been trying to draw upon different research methodologies that are being really promoted and developed by Pacific researchers, and one of which is Talanoa, which is a dialogic inquiry. And I wasn't really sure if I was doing it properly, and I was really concerned about getting it wrong, or maybe all of my insider-outsider dynamics were screaming about maybe I shouldn't even be doing this. So it was constantly, when I was in Fiji in particular, I think really just talking to as many Pacific researchers as I could, and trying to Talanoa with them, and to have a dialogic inquiry with them about methodology. And Talanoa is in a nutshell, it's kind of a type of interview, but you do it alongside of something else. You're working together on something, or it means that you don't have to have an interview, a focus group. You can have a dialogic inquiry at any moment in time, because we're always learning all the time, aren't we? Based on any kind of conversation that we're having. So I think that was helpful, having lots of conversations with others that are trying to really push this idea of quite kind of indigenous-based practices of research. That was helpful. Then of course I was back here in the UK, and I didn't have that same kind of access to that conversation. Now of course we use Zoom all the time, and the barrier isn't really quite the same. But the other things that kind of helped me were finding out about the movement out of the Findhorn Foundation in Scotland called the New Story Movement. And when I found out about this New Story Movement, which is really a group of people who are dedicated to rewriting the story of humanity's relationship with the earth, but from all different perspectives, economists, social scientists, farmers, and that really gave me, I think, that finding that was what helped me begin to find my way again, and working with, going to these workshops that we're running by Zoom. Actually, my first Zoom experiences were with the Findhorn Foundation about this New Story group. So finding a community that wasn't in a university setting, but more of a practitioner-based community that was, we were all trying to come up with ways of how do we write a new stories actually. One story is not sufficient. Actually, that's actually part of the problem, is having a grand narrative at all about how we relate to the earth. So that was probably another, not quite the same kind of a tipping point, but finding that really assisted the process along the way.
Thanks a lot, Terra. Thank you. Can we hear from you, Injairu, as well? So Terra's talked about some of the things that helped her in finding confidence in in representing things in a way that felt authentic to her and others. So, like, what about yourself, Injairu?
Yeah, I think resourcing from culture that exists was a big thing for me. In particular, the concept of accompaniment. And what came up for me at a particular point is I read this article in the Mail and Guardian that Millie Bongela wrote, and she was talking about the concept of ugukhapa in Xhosa, which means to kind of escort or accompany a person. And the whole tagline of the article is that in joy or in sorrow, we are never meant to be alone. And it was fascinating because I looked into Luhya culture because I'm from Kenya. And there's a word for that in Luhya, kohelekisa. I looked into Sotho culture, which I've been exposed to. There's a word for that, hufeletsa. And I was suddenly so aware of how the concept of accompanying somebody is so much deeply embedded in a lot of cultures on the continent. And what I found really liberating and permission giving was to think about my research as accompaniment. Especially because of that experience of writing the paper, which in somehow I felt like I was looking at the subject, so to speak, and I'd lost the shoulder to shoulder kind of camaraderie of accompaniment that ugukhapa or hufeletsa speaks about. And the fact that she wrote that article as discourse in the Mail and Guardian, I was like, come on, you know, this is a time for that, where we surface these things and as boldly as we can step forward with them and saying, this is the concept that I'm choosing to use. You know, and so I use the concept of ugukhapa or accompanying or escorting to help me justify to academia, because everybody else, what I'm doing and what the ethics behind that is and how, so that was very, very permission giving for me, yeah.
Thank you, Injairu. So what hearing you talk, it's reminding me of D'Souza Santos, who was here at Bristol Conversations in Education last year, talking about the pluriversity. And what you're doing, what you're describing here is decolonizing the traditional research process, which we've inherited.
Absolutely.
I can see how this idea of accompanying is quite radically different to the kind of betrayal that a lot of people who, such as myself, who've written more traditional ethnographic work, feel in representing people, in stepping away from the fieldwork site and then representing it. And so I can see this is such a great example of how this idea, this notion of accompaniment can it transgresses these traditional practices.
Yes, and I think what I'd say, just to accompany what you're saying, is that there's also something about showing up in a less articulate way, or giving myself the opportunity to shake in my boots and sing the data. That was also really good. It's a different stance, a different gesture as a researcher, and it almost, for me, it almost felt true to when everybody offered so much of themselves so generously. It's also important for me to shake in my boots to think about how to offer something back, you know, because it's not easy. It's not easy to share just the depth of what everybody was sharing. So how do I struggle to meet that in a humble but, you know, expressive way of this is what I heard. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. And incredibly powerful, as a number of people have expressed in the chat. Incredibly powerful performance as well. Okay, so you've said, okay, let's move to the last phase of this interview then. So I'm wondering, you've said this is like you didn't start out on this route with these methodologies planned out, and it's something that evolved in discussion with your participants and people you encountered on your research journey. So did anything surprise you from this? Lessons that you take from this unintended journey?
Yeah, I want to show you somebody. Hold on. Hold on a minute. Let me find a picture. I'm just gonna. So I think the most surprising. So this isn't. Just to show you this character. Can you see all right? One of the most surprising things for me about the journey was that, so I was writing conversations in the mangrove, and the mangrove was everything that, all of the conversations that I had during the field work. But then I ended up meeting this beauty, and her name is Dogfish Woman. And I ended up, she's from let me find you another picture of her. I'm just gonna flick through, sorry. She's part of this boat. So there's apologies for this, didn't have it. Okay, this is the spirit of Haida Gwaii, and it's part of a mythological story from the Haida people, which is on the Western Canadian coast, an island. And this became quite an important part of my theoretical framework about multiplicity. And so I ended up having conversations with Dogfish Woman. Here she is. She's in this kind of cacophony of characters that are rowing along. And so in the thesis, she comes to the mangrove every once in a while. They row along. She gets out. She's part dogfish, part woman. And she's a really important character to the Haida people about multiplicity and how you can inhabit kind of multiple ways of being. And I ended up having a lot of conversations with her in the story, in the thesis, and she was kind of my critical friend. So the things that I felt like I had a really hard time acknowledging, or the really critical questions that somehow I just couldn't use my own voice to say, she said them. So we wrote together, and she asked me the really difficult things. So kind of towards the end, she helps me to pull everything together in the main findings. So that was kind of one of the really surprising aspects for me, because I didn't know anything about her beforehand, and she just kind of crept her way into the story.
Thank you, Terra. Thank you, Dogfish Woman. Sorry, no, I wasn't saying that about you. Sorry. Yeah. So, Joe, anything that that you wanted to share unexpected?
So just to bring what I've shared full circle, I want to, as a way of answering your question, just read a bit of a response that Sanele, the same individual who you met in the video, wrote back. So the methodology was that each person was sent back their video, and they also sent the song that was what I heard, and then they were given the space to comment and to talk about what it brought up for them. Excerpts again, because it's a lot. So Sanela said, it was the most beautiful thing to hear someone else's interpretation of my offering in an unconventional, rigorous, and invoking format in the form of a song, something that could communicate right to my soul, mind, and heart at once. Thank you for this. There was something powerful in throwing a response offering to someone's offering in this way. For me, it represents vulnerability, the willingness to go an extra mile and say, what does all of this mean to me? And then Sanela goes on to say, I've always been suspicious of the conventional academic modes of analysis. I've always felt the gaze of theory, wherever people would analyze my offering, the discourse, ontological analysis, you name it. There's something uncomfortable, almost not natural, very laboratory in outlook and approach, almost reminiscent of colonial ways of collecting knowledge and making sense of it. Treating human beings only as subjects of analysis for the sake of confirming or disputing theoretical frameworks, and engage less on how this can translate in other liberating formats like music, poetry. But then he goes on to talk about, he goes on to talk about how his thinking has moved by watching and revisiting what he had said, because each person got the video and the song back 2 years after they'd offered it. So it was a big iteration of reflection. And he says, I have observed that my analysis of the complexities that face student movements tends to focus sharply on class, perhaps for lack of grammar. What I've come to learn over the years is how the grammars of suffering of Black people don't fit neatly into the epistemological frames explicated from the Western theories. The view about the need to talk about class is perhaps something I've changed over the years. I would now say perhaps the conversation needs to be more about understanding the nuances of Blackness, considering the social and economic background amongst other things. These to me do not necessarily imply class as we know it. The class category as a unit of analysis becomes a bit tricky in understanding African ontologies. And I found this very interesting and very surprising because there was a very strong metabolizing of where he was at, but also a very strong theorizing of his new coordinates and what he was choosing in a way that deeply enriched an understanding of the current discourse that the change drivers are surfacing. And it's so powerful. I mean, to talk about class as not being a useful or particularly fitting way of talking about the struggles is powerful. And that takes the conversation somewhere else, which is, I guess, the intention of the work in terms of education, both individually, but also as collectives. So I was really surprised at where the conversations could go. And the new rough paths in the Fynbos that were being carved out as a result of walking through that. And that was my deepest desire in engaging was to have people to reflect and to speak quite from their gut about, no, it's not that anymore, it's this. Because then we're moving forward, then we're going somewhere, and we don't have to recede back to the same conversation. We can say, can we rather start from there then and see what else wants to emerge? So that was pretty surprising for me. I didn't know that another iteration was going to emerge from it.
Injairu, and you're saying that really this stemmed from the fact that you're representing what he's told you back to him has resulted in these realizations.
Yeah, and what I read there is his individual reflection, but he's gifting us all with almost a different theoretical framework of understanding, the issues on class in South Africa in a very powerful way. And it's almost like and you can hear when he was speaking, it's there, but his philosopher person was there showing us what we should rather be talking about is this, otherwise we collapse into these spaces. And there was very beautiful examples of that coming up as a result of sharing back the videos and the Song of Understanding. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time and explanations to these questions. I think we had, in line with this being an Unintended Methodologies presentation, I think we're going to swap around the order of things. So there's obviously a lot of people who want to come in with their own questions and comments. So let's just throw it open to the floor at this stage. Does anyone have any comments or questions that they want to make for Injairu and Terra at this stage? You can raise your hand, or you can just turn your microphone on.
Do you want people to raise their hand with the Zoom raise, obviously, or?
Janet has turned her.
Just to get the ball rolling, I could just pick up on something I said in the chat, and apologies if it's obvious, but you are both really good at crafting the artistry. And I know, it's really, when it's really good, it seems effortless, but actually it really isn't effortless. And we're not all capable of doing this kind of stuff. I just think it's really important to acknowledge that. I'm not saying it's all kind of, well, a lot of it is just some people are better at being creative in this kind of way than others, and whether that's practice or some kind of innate talent, who knows? That's a complicated and contested matter, but this isn't something that everybody can do. And just to say how brilliant you both were in your performances, and thank you so much for sharing with us. It's brilliant, wonderful, really uplifting on a slightly soggy Wednesday to hear you performing.
Thanks, Janet. Yeah, I don't know, Injairu, like how many iterations you went through of writing songs, but like that seaweed story that I read out at the start, I think it went through about 8 iterations, and it was the first one that appeared. So I worked on it the most. I took it, actually physically like took it to the mangrove and sat in the mangrove with it and be like, okay, how would you say this? And yeah, I think a little, maybe potential bit of schizophrenia happening in there at one point, but yeah, I think, yeah, it was just doing it over and over and over again, and some of them, but not all of the stories have that, but kind of refinement. But yeah, it wasn't easy, but it's what it felt like it needed to be. Like I kept coming back to the thing that guided me through, like when I felt like this is impossible, was the line from Rumi about let yourself be silently drawn by the strange pull of what you really love, and it will not lead you astray. I just knew that this is kind of how it needed to be analyzed. And some people have asked that question, like, is this form, like, is this the contribution of the thesis? Is it possible to separate out the end result or the findings from the method? For me, it wasn't really, it was all, yeah, together. Yeah, I don't know. Injairu, what?
Yeah, I mean, Janet, I hear you. I think what is also surprising, going back to the question that Raphael asked earlier, is that this is the first piece of work that I've done as an academic that actually integrates all aspects of me. And the fact that I have worked with music and have been a kind of singer-songwriter was like in my back pocket, sure, you know, the craft of it. And it was only in this emergency that I'm just like, oh my gosh, I'm just gonna have to pull out this card and find a way to talk up to. But it was completely daunting to even agree to myself that I'm gonna write 21 songs. It was completely crazy making. I didn't know if it was even possible. And it's not, and it's process music, it's not about the performance or the singing or whatever, right? But even still, I do think there's an invitation to look at what's in the back pocket, what's in each person's back pocket, whatever that might be. And I'm in correlation with what Terra is saying, whatever strange things that are pulling you, and hopefully to see how that can serve, at least, if anything, the sense of integrating oneself wholly in a space where often, for me anyways, my master's was one where I went with it with my head. Sure, my heart was involved, but this one was much more messy. My spirit was holding me in a corner, asking me questions. So I guess it's that aspect of it that maybe is a broader invitation. I hear what you're saying.
I have 2 points, and then I'll hand over to other people and mute myself. Really fascinating. Love to talk about this more. One, I think it's brilliant to have close to practice research, and Terra, when you were talking about your connection with that community-based group in Scotland, I begin with F, I'm sorry I've forgotten the name. I thought that was really interesting because very often, as someone who does a lot of close to practice-based research myself, to have it being arts-based as opposed to quite pragmatic mixed methods, ujimiflip, that was really refreshing and really exciting. I do think the problem, close to practice research, is already low status. So you combine that with arts-based research, which is low status in the academy because of the way that it's currently constructed. You know, it's a real issue. This is so important, and thank you again for sharing. You've really demonstrated the power and value of what you do. But you know, how do we get this more center stage in what we do in the academy? Because it's, you know, really far too far at the bottom of the pile at the moment. But thank you.
Thanks, Janet. Does anyone want to respond to that question about the status of the close to practice research? Sorry, Injairu, yeah.
There's something that Janet said that kind of sparked something for me. Ooh, have I lost my train of thought? Oh, it's about muscle memory as a researcher. And I think what's invisible in what I've said so far is, I found myself saying this so many times, so I'm still not done saying it, obviously. It's like, as a researcher, all this time I've been using my right hand. And I had to learn the weird thing of how to work with my left, and to try and build, because even to get to a point where each person could offer, my experience as a facilitator in holding space, in teaching, would often go to trying to control a space, really. And I had to keep inviting myself to opening up. You know, there's a lot of unlearning, basically, that I'm saying for myself as part of this process, that has broken me open a lot. And I just wanted to put that there. So it's not just like an intuitive, you know, it was a lot of work to think about what I'm trying to create and what way of being in myself would help facilitate that. Yeah.
Thank you, Injairu. I think Sean wanted to say something. You turned your camera on a moment ago. Hey, Sean. Sorry, Sean, we can't hear you.
I forgot to unmute. I always want to say something, but this is just so so wonderful to hear. And what I wanted to respond to specifically is when you asked for responses to Janet's question about how can we foreground this work more and not let it be at the bottom of the pile or low status. And my kind of ontology that I work within is a relational one, and it compares a kind of relational circular way of being, cyclical way of being, with a more westernized linear way. And one of the things that struck me is it said that in a linear reality, everybody wants to be a cause and not an effect. So this idea that, I think it's this idea of kind of, to have low status or to have bottom of the pile suggests a linear ontology as opposed to a relational ontology, which would recognize, you know, these works as a confluence of ideas that, and this, you know, particularly what you were saying about the response, that kind of relationship that evolved from the song as a kind of expression of your meeting, and then thereafter everything changes everything in a relational ontology. And so I don't know if even concepts like bottom of the pile and low status would apply. At the same time, I understand, you know, that why people ask these questions, because that's the ontology that kind of dominates in our context here in the West, or in the UK for sure. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Sean. Oh, sorry, Injairu.
I just wanted to say something that links to that, Sean, if I'm saying your name right. To whom? Low status and bottom of the pile, to whom? To whom? I think that's the question that we are forced to ask ourselves in our work as researchers. And I guess what was holding me in the corner was, in terms of the people who I'm journeying with, how do I honor them? You know? So it's also about appreciating the gaze. And I get it. When you're trying to write a PhD, at the end of the day, you know, the panel must say that this is indeed that thing. But it's also appreciating the gaze that sits on our shoulders when we write and when we think. And if in a time when we're thinking about the future of the university and, you know, the future of education, it's really important to use a compass that asks, orientate ourselves that in ways that make us maybe accountable is not the right word, make us resonant with those who we're journeying with, who these futures, you know, for futures worthy of our longing. So yeah.
Thank you. And I think Claire had a contribution to make here. There was a comment in the chat. Claire, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I suppose I'm just sitting here as someone who is based at an arts and design university. So yeah, so for me, that is our bread and butter, right? Practice-based research, arts-based and design-based methodologies. But as I put in the chat, it is often the case that researchers have to draw on social science methods to legitimize or to complement or bring something more to the data, because the data can be so sometimes difficult to read if you don't have the specialism. And similarly, there are people who develop very strong arts-based methodologies like the examples here, that then can influence other fields. So that's really just a comment from someone in that type of position. I specifically myself work with movement-based and body-led activities, drawing on improvisation and choreography.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you. Yeah, and I think it seems to be a feature of coloniality itself that puts maybe arts-based and methods in a subordinate position, maybe within in hierarchies of knowledge. Thank you so much for your contributions there. We've got not much time left, but we're going to move over to the Padlet now, and we've got I'm just going to put this in the chat. We've got a Padlet here, which you should see that, which you can open in a web browser. And there's just some questions there to invite people to reflect on the ways that they listen in their own research.
Just to say that I think the Padlet's set up so that all of the contributions are maybe anonymous. The idea wasn't to, it was just to offer a space for if people want to add something, but we're not doing anything with it later or whatever. So it's just, it's nice to see others' ideas and kind of spark off of one another. So that was the intention with that there. What do you guys think? How much time do we want to? We had an idea of playing a piece of music and just giving everybody a few minutes to sit with themselves. You can write on your notepad or you can write on the Padlet if you want. And then when do you want us to come back together, Raphael?
Can we come back here in 6 minutes then?
Okay.
Okay, I'll play a track I'll put the details of who it is by, but I'll play a track to hold the 6 minutes. Yeah.
Thank you, Injairu. So yeah, if we can just reflect on listening within using those questions as prompts while we're hearing this music.
Raphael, is it possible to pull up that PowerPoint slide for people that might not be used to using Padlet or can't get into it? We've got the same questions on a PowerPoint slide too. So if you don't want to use the Padlet, you can see them here.
Okay, I'm going to play. Is that okay?
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the music and the time for reflection. Before we move on to Leon's final words, who's going to close this, does anyone want to share what they've been thinking in response to these questions? Does anyone have any thoughts? You can put them in the chat or just turn your microphone on and then we'll invite you to speak.
I think one thing that came up for me was the new ways of thinking about what is or isn't research. I've been involved with lots of arts projects and processes, including quite recently collecting poems from trans and non-binary writers and song lyrics as well for 2 anthologies. And it just sort of occurred to me during this webinar, and particularly in that activity, that you know, this is also a form of research, and it's just sort of allowing people to speak in their own words, but collating those words around a theme, and then maybe at the end coming up with a poem or a song that would sum them up, or, you know, sort of draw out, not sum them up, but draw out some of the themes from them could be an interesting way of closing the book.
Thank you, Ash. Thanks so much. And in fact, that was the highlight of my whole last week, actually, was Ash singing in the presentation we gave at the last Bristol Conversations in Education. Thanks, Ash.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, all right. Unless anyone else wants to come forward, let's hand it over to Leon.
Okay, thanks. Well, I mean, it's a classic case of it being an almost impossible act to follow. I mean, what wonderful presentations, and how well chaired as well, Raphael. But, you know, and what wonderful contributions from everybody. It really has been a very rich exposition, the potential of arts-based methods. And I have the enormous privilege of working with Terra and Injairu and Raphael, in fact, in the context of TESF, as many people will be aware. And I think, you know, arts-based methods have a particular resonance for the kind of work that we're doing. I just wanted to make 2 points very briefly that I hope kind of encapsulate that. One is about, and it relates to the point that Ash was just making as well, about the potential of arts-based methods. You know, I think that there are many ways of understanding complexity and emergence that we characterize with sustainable development, or the challenges of sustainable development, from different quantitative and qualitative techniques. And there's a great virtue, of course, in encouraging a diverse range of methodologies to answer complex, wicked problems. But there's something special about arts-based methods, I think, in terms of the narrative, the space, the opportunity that they provide to capture that complexity, its nuance, and its constant emergence, and its link to real people in real situations and to agency. And I think that brings me to the second point, which is really one about emancipation. You know, I mean, I think one of the terrible tragedies, of course, of empiricist thought is that it tries to separate out fact from emotion, and tries to separate out our agency and our values from the truth that we try to discover. And of course, arts-based methods are a wonderful way of trying to of addressing that, of really bringing in the affective dimensions of change, and drawing attention to the important role of human beings, of agency in struggle for change. In a context where we're trying to listen to different perspectives about what sustainable futures actually look like, to be able to access different culturally based perspectives is crucial. And I think both Terra and Injairu's research did that in important ways. In terms of representational justice, you know, Terra, one of the powers of arts-based methods that really came through for me in her presentation was the extent to which it allows us to begin to think about how we might represent the agency of natural systems. In her case, the mangrove swamps. And of course, you know, it's very difficult to do that through rational, in inverted commas, means, which almost inevitably, you know, veer towards anthropocentric ways of knowing the world. Arts-based methods offer a wider range of opportunity to express the agency of natural systems. But in relation to Injairu's work, you know, the hurt, the pain that young man was feeling of exclusion, you can't really represent that in any simple way in a written text. And, you know, so like Injairu, I would look to my back pocket, if I had her talent, to try and complete the circle as an important way of articulating in a way that others can access, can get into, can respond to, can engage with, can accompany, to use that term that our two presenters used, the young man on his journey of emancipation. So I'll leave it there just to say, you know, how inspiring these talks have been and how much I've learned from them. So thank you both very much indeed. And thank you, Raphael, for this opportunity to reflect.
Thank you, Leon. Thank you. Well, we're reaching the end of our time here today together. So any final words from Terra or Injairu before to send people off into the rest of their Wednesdays?
Ready for that.
Unexpected.
I don't know. It's somehow just finding time to carve out time to play. Like, you know, we come to the work that we do because we're really passionate about it, but the more maybe playful, joyful it can be, the more we put into it. And that's one way of showing our passion and actually helps to push it further. So just finding time to carve out space to be playful and experiment, which I know is difficult to do in this kind of the way that higher education tends to work. But if we don't try to do it, it won't shift. So it's up to us to shift it.
Yes, thank you. I mean, it's been a very rich conversation. Very good to hear you all. I think the one thing that Terra and I were consistently speaking about when we were engaging about the resonances between our work is about the grace and waiting for the way the way through the muddle to kind of emerge. And I just wanted to name that too, that there is the period of trying to figure out what will suffice, and just wishing you all lots of joy on your journeys, and thank you very much for time to connect.
Thank you, Injairu and Terra. And thank you everyone for joining us. This is the end of the Bristol Conversations in Education event. So there's going to be a recording of this, which you can make available to people who weren't able to attend today. But so for now, just thanks a lot. Thank you for coming. Stay safe, everyone. And I hope to see you again soon.